What's the difference between this
A wise king knows what he knows and what he doesn't.
and this?
Someday, you'll sit on the throne and the truth will be what you make it.
Well, at first glance, both scenes show characters giving lessons about ruling. But what's really interesting here, what sets them apart? Because when you look closely, you'll see that while Tommen is taught to understand his limits, Joffrey is taught to bend the truth to his will. And the outcome? The thing is, there are 3 seasons between the scenes, but when you watch them back to back, you'll see a brutal irony, because Tywin delivers this speech in Season 4, Episode 3, while standing over Joffrey's corpse, right after he was poisoned at his own wedding. We all know how things went down over those 3 seasons. Joffrey started as a spoiled little brat and became a complete monster, shaped by everything his mother instilled him. Now here he is, lying dead, proving Tywin right in the most brutal way possible. So in such a situation, Tywin starts schooling his remaining grandson, Tommen, the future king. And while he's doing this, he absolutely tears into Cersei, calling her out for all the terrible lessons she's taught. And honestly, with a pure masterclass.
Yes.
I mean, seriously, this scene is a masterclass in so many ways, not just in terms of writing and acting, but also in how Tywin's speech about what makes a good king goes beyond the show itself. It's actually a powerful life lesson that resonates even in the real world. And what's even more interesting is that, just like the Robert and Cersei scene I analyzed earlier, this one was also written by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss. I mean, you can say a lot of things about them, but when you look back, it's clear that they were capable of writing some truly great original scenes. And this is definitely one of them. First of all, one of the most fascinating things about this scene is how perfectly it captures Tywin Lannister's character. His manipulative nature, sharp intellect, core values, and overall worldview all come through so seamlessly in the dialogue that you can't help but be drawn in. But beyond that, the scene plays a key role in introducing us to Tommen in a way we haven't seen before. We actually see just how different he's from Joffrey. We see his intelligence, his innocence, and the values that matter to him. And interestingly enough, one of those values ends up foreshadowing Tommen's ultimate fate in a really clever way, but I'll come to that later. For now, let's talk about the star of the scene, Tywin Lannister, because what he does here is simply genius. Instead of simply lecturing Tommen, he engages him in this almost Socratic way, asking questions, waiting for him to think and respond, making him an active participant in his own education. Moreover, even when Tommen gives the wrong answers, he doesn't rub it in his face. He lets him work through his mistakes himself. And even when he disagrees with him, he doesn't outright dismiss the qualities Tommen brings up. Instead, he explains why they're not enough on their own, using examples to make his point. And the way he phrases it actually tells us a lot about his perspective.
What is a good king's single most important quality?
This is hardly the place or the time.
Tommen's answer to this question is pretty interesting because it sets up one of those foreshadowings I mentioned earlier.
Holiness?
The thing is, Tommen's first instinct to say holiness isn't just a random answer. It actually gives us a glimpse into what's important to him. Because as we see later on, especially after Tywin's death, this is the idea he keeps coming back to when he has no one to guide him. And well, we all know how it ends. This very idea sets the stage for all his problems with the Sparrows, which ultimately lead to his tragic end. But what's even more tragic here is that Tommen actually shows qualities of a good king. He's not quick to judge, he's open-minded, and he listens. Even when Tywin dismisses his answer, he doesn't argue. Instead, he thinks about it, understands what his grandfather is doing, and then comes up with a better answer.
Justice?
But again, Tywin shoots down his suggestion, and this is where the things get really interesting. Because remember, while Tywin rejecting Tommen's ideas, he backs up his points with stories of 3 kings. He uses Baelor as an example for holiness, Orys for justice, and Robert Baratheon for strength. And the thing is, these aren't just random examples. They actually foreshadow what happens to 3 major characters later in the story. Let me explain it this way. First, think about Stannis. His story actually mirrors Baelor's in a lot of ways, especially with his obsession with Melisandre and the Lord of Light. Stannis even goes so far as to sacrifice his own daughter for this belief. But in the end, that blind devotion is what destroys him. Just like Baelor died from starvation, Stannis is defeated when his army is left with nothing. His forces crumble due to hunger, and it costs him everything. Then there's King Orys, who kind of represents Jon Snow. Just like Orys, Jon tries to be a fair leader, even to his enemies. But in the end, he's killed by his own brothers in the Night's Watch, just as Orys killed by his own brother. And lastly, we have Daenerys. She mirrors Robert's story here. We all know how Robert took the throne through his strength, but he couldn't actually rule effectively. And Daenerys does the same thing. She conquers free cities with her dragons and her army, but she struggles to rule. In the end, they both make the same mistake. thinking that winning and ruling are the same thing. When you see it that way, all these characters and what happens to them only prove Tywin's point even more. But Tywin Lannister doesn't just stop there. While he's listing off the failures of all those past kings, he's actually building up to something much bigger. With each example, he's taking away another piece of what seemed important, slowly leading Tommen toward understanding what truly matters.
What do they all lack?
I mean, it's fascinating to watch Tommen process this question. Because unlike Joffrey, who would have probably interrupted with something stupid by now, Tommen actually takes it all in and then finally gives the answer Tywin's been waiting for.
Wisdom.
Yes.
Now, this is probably the most important moment of the scene because that one simple line doesn't just crown Tywin's lesson. It completely changes the dynamic in the room. Because if you take a closer look, you'll see 3 distinct reactions, and each one tells us a lot about the characters present. First of all, just look at Cersei's face when Tommen says wisdom. It's a powerful moment because in that split second, you can see her realizing that maybe Tommen could actually be a good king. But right after that, you can see the fear hit her. She's suddenly aware of what Tywin is doing. Honestly, Lena Headey does an amazing job here. She doesn't need any words, just watch her face and you can read everything. From Tywin's perspective though, it's easy to see that he is genuinely impressed by Tommen's intelligence. You can almost see him thinking that he's finally found someone he can work with. Someone young, adaptable, and smart enough to understand what it takes to rule. You can even hear his excitement in his voice.
Yes.
But this is not enough for Tywin Lannister. He keeps pushing Tommen, throwing harder questions at him. When he asks, what makes a wise king, Tommen hesitates. And this is where Tywin shows his true genius. Because Tywin doesn't just give him the answer here, he delivers one of the most powerful lessons you'll ever hear in a TV show.
A wise king knows what he knows and what he doesn't.
At first glance, this line might not seem that deep, but it's actually something that should stick with you long after you hear it. Because it's actually from a long tradition of wisdom, from Socrates' teachings to Marcus Aurelius' Stoicism and even Machiavelli's Prince. I mean, think about it. No matter how smart someone is, they have to accept that they can't know everything. We all have limits, and recognizing those limits is a sign of wisdom. The moment you start believing you're the smartest person in the room, or worse, try to stay the smartest, you're setting yourself up for failure. Because when you do that, you leave no space for people who can challenge you, teach you, or expand your thinking. That's why the wisest people are the ones who surround themselves with those they can learn from. And that's exactly what Tywin Lannister is getting at here.
Yes.
But of course, there's more to it because Tywin isn't just giving a powerful lesson here. He's also solidifying his position with the new king. When he says a wise king listened to his counselors, he's obviously talking about himself. He's making sure the new king understands that he needs him. I mean, yes, it's a manipulative move. We can't expect anything less from Tywin, but that doesn't make it any less true. After all, who could argue with what he's saying? At the end of the scene, Tywin gets exactly what he wanted, again. This moment doesn't just show how masterfully he uses words, it also reveals how he physically manipulates people. Because if you look closely, you'll see he begins the scene standing far from Tommen, but as they talk, he moves closer and closer. And by the end, he takes Tommen's arm and gently pulls him to his side. In this last shot, Tywin's expression says it all. He looks straight at Cersei, and you can almost hear him thinking, I'm taking this child before you ruin him like you did Joffrey. At that moment, we all realized that this lesson wasn't just for Tommen, it was for Cersei too. At this point, you might think everything seems perfect for Tywin Lannister. But if you step back and look at the bigger picture, especially knowing how the things play out later, the real irony becomes impossible to ignore. Because in the end, every single character in this scene eventually fall victim to their own blindness to this very lesson, even Tywin Lannister himself. And maybe that's what makes Game of Thrones so great. The smartest, the strongest, or the most honorable, no matter who they are, end up being undone by the very qualities that define them. In the end, they all pay the price. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate if you could leave a comment, give a like, and click to subscribe. Your support will greatly help the mysterious algorithm notices me. And if you want to support me personally, you can join the channel by using the join button. See you next time.